just to give you a little bit more about that, because we really anchor our whole approach in a focus on strengths. We're drawing on positive psychology. We're focusing on well-being. We're looking at enhancing belonging, increasing student motivation and engagement. And a lot of things you've heard already today talking about autism and ADHD especially, right, with special interests and interest-based motivation, right? Those things, when you bring in student strengths, what they're good at, what they care about, you're gonna see that motivation and that engagement. You might even get more than you expect, right? So we're looking at how the strengths come into your teaching across a whole range of domains, right? So your language, your interactions with students, the way you design your course. So starting at the top here, when we're talking about interactions and language with students, are we talking about their weaknesses all the time, or are we talking about their assets, what they're bringing to the table, what's valued in the classroom? When we talk about course design, we're thinking about how you can be successful in a course. So what's privileged? If everything is done in writing, are you privileging that mode of thinking and communicating over all others all the time, right? So that student who's exceptionally gifted at 3D animations and can see the big picture visually maybe, but struggles sometimes with words, if that writing piece is always privileged, how do other students then show their talents? When you're selecting the content, is there any flexibility for students to incorporate their hobbies, their passions, things that aren't obviously connected sometimes, but that you can still make a connection to? Are students able to use a range of strengths in their class activities? And again, that's like the moving around sometimes, or the building things, right? For assessment, we're talking about bringing strengths in by being able to show their learning in multiple ways. And again, going back to that support thing that lots of folks have talked about today, how can students use their strengths to support challenges? So really just focusing on strengths across the board. All right, and so I see my captions are blocking the title up there, which could be kind of exciting if it was moved over a tiny bit. Neurodiversity as an asset in STEM. Sorry. We're coming at this from this perspective, right? From engineering, we're looking for creative ways to solve problems. And part of what we do is really just counteracting the messages that we've heard through research that has focused only on deficits for so long. So we're talking about bringing in talents in risk-taking, divergent thinking, hyper-focus, curiosity, exploration, while still, obviously, remembering these challenges that are going on too. There may be challenges with focus, motivation, memory, time management, emotional regulation, right? For autism, we've heard a lot about systems thinking, attention to detail, pattern identification, originality, especially with like language, word combinations. There's some research around that. Deep dives into areas of interest. I want to say, I'm putting these up here specifically to counteract that deficit-based narrative, not to pigeonhole people as like every single person with this label is going to be the same, right? Everyone's different, and I think we've heard other people say that today as well, but it's good to have a place to start, right? There's research that has shown associations with dyslexia and 3D skills and holistic thinking and creativity and entrepreneurship, right? So obviously we're still trying to support these bottom things, but when you just focus on the bottom things, you're missing out on all this awesome stuff at the top. All right, so what we end up with is an environmental mismatch, right? We've got this this lecture classroom, and these brains that are wired to do different things. Okay, so talking about this, right? So I was diagnosed with ADHD as an adult after years of teaching, not knowing I had ADHD, and like taking fidget spinners away from kids, right? Meanwhile, the irony of this is like, I'm doing this the whole time I'm teaching. I'm walking in circles literally the whole time, right? So I have trouble in these like lecture halls too, because I feel like it doesn't allow the flexibility that I want in a classroom. So what your students are feeling, some of you obviously are feeling, right, in this format as well. So how do we change the teaching to kind of be more flexible for the wiring? And part of that is looking at the box of education, right? So I put this up here for a couple of reasons. So the box thing, and I made a couple notes because I was like, I'm gonna forget. What's the box about? So part of this is realizing that we're putting students in a box. Part of it's realizing we bring our own box as teachers, right? And when you open that up and allow students to bring their skills and be curious about what's happening, we can actually learn things that's not even in our box that we brought, right? So I think if you think about it like a very young child who's walking around the room and you're trying to just get them to sit down, you're missing an opportunity to say, what is this child after? Like, what are they learning? What are they walking around looking at? They're exploring things. They're trying to learn about their environment. What are they after? What are they going to find that you aren't going to notice because you're just focused on the one task? All right. So I am, before I leave today, I have about 10-15 minutes left, I am going to share a few of the kind of general principles that we talk about and maybe highlight a few practices. I'm not going to give you a list. They're in my slides if you want to look at them later. I'm assuming they're going to be available. There are some extra things at the end that I probably won't get to, but I want to talk a lot about the language piece, the communication piece, and the personalization piece, because I think those are some of the most important starting points. And I've got this fish here because I wanted to point out that part of this process, when we're talking about strengths-based language, is noticing the water that you're swimming in. And if you're familiar with, there's a model called the water of systems change model. And so the idea, right, is that the fish can't see what they're swimming in, right? It's just, you're just swimming in it. What water, you know? So part of it is unpacking those biases and those deficit-based things that we have in our minds. And this is from that model. So at the bottom, this mental models thing, that's super important for neuroinclusive teaching. It's maybe the most important, I think, is making that shift from focusing on deficits to focusing on strengths. So I'm going to have you think for a second. Maybe talk to someone next to you for a minute, if you're okay with that. And actually do a little exercise here in flipping some of these scripts that we have. Because we've heard, even today, anytime this topic comes up, we hear some statements, right, that are negative. And there are ways to reframe these things. But it takes a little shift. So I'm going to actually ask you to just maybe turn to someone nearby, if you're okay with it, and see if you can't figure out a few ways to flip these. Make it into a positive. Make it into a strength.
Oh, I see.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you. I'm going to interrupt you again and bring it back, if you don't mind. All right. Can I ask for a couple of flipped narratives? Just any one, it doesn't matter which one.
For the last one, works well under pressure.
Nice. Love it. The organizers can tell you how long ago I emailed them my slides.
So I work with Connie, so I'm cheating a bit. But for the can't stick to topic, she has a lot of ideas. She's able to see connections. She's interesting.
Any other good ones that you feel you want to share?
Well, I have two. So he's very socially awkward. I said he's very introspective. And then the other one, he can't stick to the topic. He has amazing ideas and things outside the box.
Thank you. All right, I see one more over here.
For he does everything at the last minute, we said he thrives under pressure.
All right. Who else is? All right, you go.
For she can't stop moving, we said she's a kinetic learner.
All right. Anything else we got?
For they won't stop asking questions, it's that they value clarity.
Valuing clarity. This is an interesting one that they won't stop asking questions is one that we hear a lot about because I think folks feel pressured, right, to cover the material and get through things and make sure everyone has a chance to ask their questions. And so it's challenging to see that one as a strength when you're trying to pursue a certain agenda. But if you look at it, right, as someone who just deeply, deeply wants to look at all the parts of this thing and really understand it, and maybe there's a better place to do it. And you can have that conversation elsewhere, but also acknowledging that strength to the student is something that I'm sure doesn't happen very often. So thanks for doing that exercise with me. I find it's something that can really shift how you're thinking about your students. So flip that thing. All right, there we go. A little more communication, and I think Bridget talked a little bit about this. A few thoughts around communication, inviting conversation about neurodiversity, also not a very common thing, right? So one of the things that we heard from undergrad students and from grad students is that, there's a lot of silence and a lot of hiding and a lot of shame and a lot of not being able to be authentic. And so saying something at the beginning of your class absolutely makes a huge difference in terms of if your students trust you and know that you have their back, right? That's big. Feedback loops are great. Instructions in writing are great. Being clear, providing flexibility in terms of like how you communicate, like Bridget mentioned, in terms of like Maybe it's texting, maybe it's Teams, maybe it's Discord, you know, if you're flexible to have those kind of options. So those things are great. Consistency about response time, that's a tough one. But considering momentum and students who have trouble getting started with things and really want to keep going, and they're waiting on that one piece of feedback maybe, and it's just like not coming, and then the momentum is dropped. So response time is important, and then also anxiety, right, gets going when people don't respond. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here to one practice that I want to highlight, and that is if you can create an inclusion statement in your syllabus, or if not in written format, at least in verbal format, like I mentioned at the beginning of your course. It can be very powerful for students to see an in-writing statement that you are committed to inclusive teaching and that you're working to make your class better to highlight their strengths. So a few guidelines around that, you know, again, you can, I'm not going to read this whole list to you, but highlight what you're doing, invite students to talk to you. Otherwise, the general perspective that I've heard from students is that my professors don't want to give me accommodations. They think it's a burden, they think it's unfair, and they don't want me to ask about it, so I'm not going to say anything. So that's obviously, you know, that's a big difference.